leftovers, or the DMV,
Number 97.
or house cleaning, or Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
So you open Google Chrome on your phone, you're hunting for a super rare first edition vinyl of a band you're obsessed with, when you're supposed to be working. But this site you tapped on seems pretty shady. And Daryl from IT just jumped up from his desk. Oh no, he's coming your way. It's a good thing built-in malware protection keeps you safe and sound. Not from Daryl, though. Sorry. There's no place like Chrome. Download Google Chrome on your phone.
You're listening to 100 Words or Less with Ray Harkins. What is up, everybody? How are you doing? I am actually in Hawaii. Well, to be honest, I'm recording this before I go to Hawaii, but just because I'm on vacation does not mean the rock stops. Of course, we're talking to people who are involved in independent music. If this is your first time here, welcome. Totally appreciate you downloading and putting this in your ear holes. You can go sit in the back, have a cup of coffee, enjoy. But basically, we talk to people who are involved in independent music, whether that's creating it, publicizing it, putting it out, whatever it is, as long as we've been influenced by, punk, hardcore, metal, emo, adjacent stuff. That is who I am talking to. And James Goodson, he is a man about town, so to speak. He plays in a band called Dazy, D-A-Z-Y, that is awesome. I knew him prior to this musical project coming together because he has done PR for a lot of different bands for many years. And he's been doing it on his own, separate from an agency, for probably the better part of 3 or 4 years, but just does a great job. Let me tell you, some PR people, it can get pretty punishing. They're pitching you stuff where it's this has nothing to do with what this show is, or they're coming up with ideas that it's this is not actually fit. You've clearly never listened to this show, which is fine. I understand people are just doing their jobs, but James is not one of those people. He brings me cool ideas, and he brings many of the cool podcasts that exist out there, great ideas and magazines and all that stuff. But anyways, James has a rad band, and that's why I wanted to talk to him, because he's currently on tour right now with Snail Mail, and he's an incredibly prolific musician because he puts out singles and EPs all the time. Dazy, I want to say in the maybe last 6 to 8 months has released 8 or 9 songs. He, as you'll hear from the interview, he just releases stuff when he wants to, and it's great and it's awesome. So I love James, and I love to have this discussion with him. You can support the show. First of all, you can email me, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com, whenever you want to throw guest ideas or just curious about stuff. I'm here, I'm open. I'm open? My email box is open, that's true. You can also, this is a completely free way to support the show. You can toss a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, or you can toss a rating on Spotify. I know many of you, tens of thousands of you, listen on a weekly basis, and you do not do this. And that's totally fine. I get it, but I'm imploring you, 10 seconds today, just do that. It helps out the show tremendously. Also, you can follow the show along on YouTube. There is a link in the show description where you can subscribe. And that's just another way that you can consume this thing, because some people like listening to podcasts on YouTube, and I'm totally fine with that. So I want to meet you where you're listening. And so that's what I got from a business perspective. Like I said, I'm in Hawaii, just hanging out with my family here. I'm still working. It's weird because even though we all live in a world where we are constantly connected. People take vacations and they're like, yeah, but if I disconnect for a week, I'm going to have so many emails and it's so stressful. And I don't know. I've always personally enjoyed my job. So there are times where I just completely disconnect, but at the same time, I'm if I can get some work done and, hang out and be in a different environment, that's cool. I'm fine with that as well. So anyways, that's what I'm doing. But actually, before we talk to James, let's talk coffee. My favorite coffee on the whole planet is Bodhi Leaf Coffee. They are an incredible roaster and coffee store here in Orange County, but they have an amazing offer that I want to give you first and foremost. 100 Words Pod. That is the promo code, and you can get 15% off of your roasted coffee subscription. 12 ounce or 5 pound, whatever your choice is. If you're drinking a lot of beans, 5 pound is where you want to go. But this promo code 100 Words Pod gives you 15% off your order. What's cool about subscriptions is that you can cancel at any time if you have, a stack of beans where you're like, I got to get through these first. But no joke, this is the best coffee I've ever had. I love what they do. I never really messed around with whole beans up until probably about a year and a half ago. It makes a world of difference. And Bodhi Leaf is the place to buy coffee. And then on top of it, I did a custom blend with them. You can find a link in the show notes where you can purchase a subscription, like I said, or a specific 100 Words Pod blend, which I loved going into their store and like testing out a bunch of coffee. It's great. So I don't care if you're like a hardcore bean head or if you're a person that's just like, I just want a good cup of coffee in the morning. Bodhi Leaf Coffee. Full stop. Just do it. Okay. Go to bodhileafcoffee.com, use that promo code 100 words for 15% off of your roasted coffee subscription, and it ships free. Super simple. So thank you for your support, Bodhi Leaf Coffee. And now, for real, let's talk to James from Dazy. I met you, obviously, when you were in your PR life and your pitch man status, as it were, a suit, as they sometimes call you. Totally. Yeah, right. But I always admired personally, like why you and I have developed a relationship over email and then obviously met in real life. I just admired the fact that it seemed like you were always involved in a million things at once. Like you had your PR stuff going and there was a lot of things that you were working, but then you also had all of your music, whether it was Teen Death, Hold Tight, whatever it is. And I presume that's kind of like basically been your mode ever since you maybe had a consciousness about this whole particular scene, or was that something that you was like, you were a kid with a lemonade stand and, hustling like that?
No, I wish. I was, no, when I was in school, I was like a real, like, bare minimum to get by kind of guy.
Sure.
But, I think I just wasn't like engaged. And I think that, to answer your earlier question, I think that's when I like finding music and sort of the way that it like engaged my brain, I think was like early on when I started to fall into that stuff. And, even as a kid, doing high school bands and stuff like that, I always just found it hard to like do it just for fun, like I would always take it like really seriously, probably like to the chagrin of anybody that has had to deal with me. Yeah, but I just always found like anything involving music to be so like engaging and rewarding on like every level. And yeah, then it ended up kind of taking over my whole life, and kind of turned into, like when we met, where I was, like you said, doing a million things.
Right. I appreciate you saying like the seriousness in which you approached the stuff that was like clearly, like your first band. It was a matter of probably life or death, where it's like,
of course,
I got to get this demo out. I got to get this show, whatever it was you were trying to accomplish.
Yeah. I remember a band, like one of the early bands that I was in, we like right out of high school, like it was the one that I was in that was sort of like, this is my high school band that is going to be my post high school band, so that one felt like, particularly like this is so serious because we're going to like move and play music and, this is so important. And, I remember we made a demo that was like, there was like 15 or 20 songs on it. Like we were like, we didn't know what a demo, like we took the idea of a demo so seriously that we put too many songs on it. And it was actually like, it was like more than you would even put on a record. It was like too much of anything.
Right.
Like, we just couldn't not like overdo it, kind of. Or even I remember we had this one thing that was we had like a 3-song demo that was probably like 3 minutes of music. You know, it was like a hardcore band, so everything was like fast and short. And we were like, you know, there's a lot of extra space on a CD. This is like real CD times, like burn CDs for your demo.
Yep.
And we're like, there's all this extra space on CDs. Like, what should we do? And we ended up stringing together like movie clips, like whatever the extra space on the CD was, you know, it was probably like at least a half an hour of movie clips, just like all these clips like run together. And it was like so pointless and asinine, but for some reason it was something that was like, well, we have to fill this space. We have to do something with it. We have to take it seriously. We have to get more out of it, you know, like and it was like, even like doing a total goof was like going overboard like that, you know, like we just always, it all seemed very serious.
Right. I honestly, and I would like to describe that as like kid logic, because there are these things that you get lodged in your brain because you saw someone else do it or you experienced it, you know, in some other fashion. So you felt like you had to get the most out of this piece of plastic, where it's like, there's 42 minutes I can contain in here. We need to use the whole space, guys. What's wrong with you?
Away.
Right.
So it was so pointless, but like I remember just spending like hours, like, you know, recording these clips off of it, because we were literally like going through DVDs and VHSs, like recording them off the computer and everything, or off the TV. You know, like it was a matter of like owning the actual physical media and then recording it off the thing and then combining them all on GarageBand or whatever. And it was like this incredibly in-depth project for what I'm sure not a single breathing human could have listened to the whole thing. Like, it's not possible.
Yeah, or cared about, and also on top of it, just the idea of clearly you went to all of the studios and got clearance for all those clips as well. I presume.
Of course, you know, we really got all that paperwork sorted out.
I figure just like every 90s and early 2000s metalcore band that had a sample on their CD, you got it cleared. Of course, that's what you did. It's just
right. Never had any problems with that.
No, and it does like really make my brain fall in on itself, where I start to think about just like, if anybody were to pay attention to that, and like it just, there would be so many, you know, lawsuits and like CDs getting pulled off the shelves and everything, but it's like, no, that just didn't happen at all.
Thank God.
Yeah, I know. We'll pick apart more of your you know, real attention to detail for things that maybe it didn't matter a little bit later, in a very positive way. I mean that, James.
It'll be a reoccurring theme, I'm sure.
Of course. I just tried to set the scene of, I know you were born and raised in like Northern Virginia, and like mom and dad in the house, and I didn't catch, like, do you siblings, brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have an older sister. She's 2 years older than me.
Okay, so she was paving the way for the baby of the family.
Yeah, she made everything easy on me by being the guinea pig.
Right. And something that I've known you just in passing and observing you as a person, like, you are a pretty, you know, generally jovial individual. Like, you know, you don't strike me as a person who would ever be labeled you know, mean or harsh or anything like that.
I hope not. I like to have a laugh.
Right. Was that, I guess, is that your disposition kind of in general from what you remember, you know, being raised and as a kid, or were you, you know, serious and then got lighter as it grew up?
I think I was always like a pretty big goof, but you know, I had like I was definitely a pretty anxious kid. I'm still a pretty anxious adult, and I think that's probably partially why I'm like also such a goof. Is that's my way of dealing with being anxious. But yeah, I don't know. I just always, everybody, you know, all my friends that I grew up with were very funny. My parents are funny. Like, it was always like a real, like, everybody, especially like the guys that I grew up with, who I still, you know, play music with all the time and stuff like that. Like, you know, it's always a real kind of who can make each other laugh the hardest, like, constant chucklehead competition. So
Sure. You're always gassing each other up and being like, all right, who's going to be the funniest one here?
Yeah, just constantly trying to make each other laugh.
Got it. That's cool. And when you were, a kid, and just because Northern Virginia, from my experience and what I've heard you articulate in other places, that it's rural, but obviously close enough to. It's not like you're living in a one stoplight town or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually did literally grow up it was a 0 stoplight town when I was a kid. And now it's a 1 stoplight town. So it's actually really, it's doubled the amount of stoplights.
It's a booming metropolis, I would say.
They're going wild up there.
Right. Oh, okay. So that I didn't know it was that rooted in the rural description, as it were.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I grew up on a dirt road, like it was definitely pretty rural. And it's grown a lot, and like it's one of those things where it's like it's a rural area, but it's also, technically like a suburb of DC, so there's people that, take the train an hour to DC every day and then take an hour back to go live in their house that's kind of quasi in the country. But it's also just, it's changed a lot since I was a kid. It's like grown a ton to 1 stoplight.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's grown a ton. Yeah. And that's, I think you really don't get a sense of that when you are raised in, even just like a mid-sized town, like the dropping a person off in this space where it's like, wait, what do you mean you have to drive 20 minutes to a grocery store or whatever?
Yeah. It was always like, that was always the thing. Like, you had to drive everywhere if you wanted to go to anything. You had to, and especially like, I had some friends that could probably like walk into town, even though there wasn't really anything in town to do. But, it was every morning with like traffic and everything, it was, 45 minutes, an hour to get to the town over where we went to school. I sound like was like in like Little House on the Prairie right now, but
yeah,
it's not like that, like in the middle of nowhere, but it's definitely, you had to like go to another town to go to like where the school was and everything. And if you wanted to go to the movies or whatever, you had to go to another town. So it was like, you were always kind of like hopping between these different little kind of like pockets, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So then moving to an actual city when I was, at a high school and moved to Richmond, it was definitely, a little bit of just, it was a little overwhelming at first, which is funny because, Richmond is not actually like that big of a city. And I've, now that I've like traveled a lot more as an adult and everything and through my life, like, you see that it's actually like a quaint city, but as a kid I was like, wow, I have such a vivid memory of driving to Richmond before I had moved there, but was like thinking about moving there, and we were like going down to visit a friend and kind of get the vibe of it and see if we wanted to live there, and driving in and getting off the highway and just being so overwhelmed by like, how will I ever know where I'm supposed to go and where I'm supposed to be and find my way? Like, how will I ever like be familiar with this? It's so like overwhelming, and now like, these are like incredibly familiar places to me, of course,
Right. Yeah. It's so, even in the sort of reverse logic of the idea that when you get dropped off to something so simple, like, rural living in whatever, Farmington, Indiana, and just like experiencing that, it's like, well, what the hell do people do? Like, what do people do here? And it's like, when you experience both, then you are able to kind of balance out like, oh, there's just a different pace of life, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's it. But it's funny that, obviously, like you said, you looked at Richmond as this, huge city, and it's just like, oh, so this is a small city. I get it.
Yeah. It was like, I mean, Richmond, like even like the downtown is like pretty tiny, like it just isn't really that big of a spot. And like, that's kind of partially why I've lived like other places since then, but I've, always kind of end up back in Richmond. And I think a lot of that is just because it's like kind of the right size and pace. And it just has, you kind of get everything that you would want out of a city. Like, it has a lot of cool stuff, but it's, smaller and a little slower in a way that I like, probably because I grew up in the country,
Right. Exactly. And that's part of when you start to experience life in the world, you know your place when you do experiment and just like, oh yeah, I know that this is not, living in a, 400 square foot apartment in New York City to like be in the thick of it. Like that's not what I want to do. Yeah. So as you started to be more of a conscious individual and, go to school and start to go to, junior high and high school and everything, were you like, I know you said that school, as far as school work, you just kind of did the thing to get by or what have you. Did you care about sports? Like what was the sort of life path that was unfolding for you?
Yeah. No, I wasn't. I was into like soccer when I was like really young, like in middle school. But by the time I had gotten to high school, it was like, like middle school, late elementary school through middle school was kind of when I was like learning about punk and like really getting into music and just like completely falling into that world. And so by the time I got into high school, I was like in full on like, sports are not cool. Like I only want to play music with my friends. Like that's all that I care about is like, getting to the weekend to play in bands and do, hang out in a basement and be loud,
Right.
And like, I liked school fine. Like, I mean, that's not true. I didn't like school, but I did fine. And I like, there was parts of it I liked being in, I was in like jazz band and stuff like that. And, that was pretty fun. And I liked art classes and drawing and things, like I liked all the like creative stuff, but I would just really struggle with a lot of the stuff that was a little bit more, when you're a kid and you feel like you're being taught things that you'll never use,
Right.
That was always like a struggle for me. And, I don't know. It didn't like totally lock in for me, but I don't feel like I was ever like really, like I reject school or I'm hating this or something. It was more just like, it didn't quite like engage me outside of like, here's a place to like see my friends.
Okay, it's Rockabilia time, and you know what that means? That means you pull out your phone or whatever listening device you are on. You go to rockabilia.com. You use the promo code 100 words or less that gets you 10% off your entire... This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Trust me in saying that therapy is an incredible tool for as you are traveling through life, because who you are as a person, 5 or 10 years ago is maybe a completely different version of yourself, because we run into challenges, whether it's work, whether it's life stuff, relationships, all of those things you can work through with a therapist. And that is why I love BetterHelp and what they do. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and then you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Ray to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/Ray. Dip in, give therapy a try, and become a better person. Order, and then plus they know that this show sent you. Rockabilia is the place where you can order. They have a pre-order for the new Husker Du record, and they also have a limited edition Descendants skate deck. They have new stuff from the Rolling Stones. Maybe you have heard of them before. All joking aside, they have a wide genre of music that you can buy merch for, and so many cool things that you can find. You can be for yourself, be for your family members, whatever it is. It ships to you from the Midwest here in the United States of America. It's all officially licensed, so that means the bands get paid. I love Rockabilia so much. I love their support, and I love to tell you about them. That is why they are continuing to work with this show week in and week out, and I love them for it. So again, 100 words or less, 10% off your entire order. Go buy, maybe like a Rolling Stones like varsity jacket. How sick is that? Oh my gosh, I love it. Anyways, rockabilia.com. 100 words or less promo code for 10% off.
It's so funny too, because as you, I have the experience of having a child and watching him go through school. It's totally those, as an adult, you feel so strange to be like, oh yeah, this, like, you're not going to use this ever. Like, and it's so interesting, but you're like, well, you have to go through it in order to understand that we all have to do things we don't want to do. It's just that like you really, really try your best to just be like, man, you wish you could just cut to the chase and like knock out school in 3 years. But it's like, no, you got to go through all these years in order to really build up the social resilience but it's,
so, like,
it's weird
as a kid to like understand that you're experiencing things and gaining something, even if it's not like what you're being told you're gaining, like the idea of like, I'm getting something out of math class just by doing it and experiencing this and, even like the social construct of it versus like, I don't give a fuck about math.
Yeah, totally.
You
like
get so much out of it that isn't, like out of being in school, that isn't just like whatever I learned today, not like I don't want to make it sound like I like didn't learn in school or something.
No, I understand. But it's like the practical application of whatever it is you're learning. And it's like, it's the same thing as when you start to, play in a band and you're developing these life skills that you would never, ever think would be a skill. But it's like, inventory management, like, it's like, oh yeah, I ordered 48 shirts and here's all 48 and they're all sorted. And it's like, that's a thing you have to learn. There's math as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'll have to remember that next time I'm counting anything to shout out my math teacher.
Oh, absolutely. You're just like, listen, I am using this in a way that you've never intended. So I win. Then as like you said, you got subsumed by music. And I know that we were talking off mic, so to speak, of Green Day was a huge entry point. And I know that was around like the Dookie era, I'm guessing. Yeah.
So when I got into Green Day, I guess I was in elementary school. Like, I'm trying to think. I guess it was in between Nimrod and Warning, because the first like Green Day album that I remember coming out was Warning.
Okay.
That I was like actively sort of like, I'm locked in on, Green Day happening, versus just like, this is a band that exists and I don't think of them as like active, Right. Yeah, like I remember Warning coming out and that being like the first time that a band I liked, and I'm sure that like I could have counted the bands I liked on like, one hand. But, the first time that a band I was excited about was like putting something out and I was aware that like I had the anticipation for it and all that, and which is funny because I know that was like sort of a divisive record for them and everything. But for me, it was like, oh, my guys are here for the first, like I'm here for my guys are putting something out for the first time that I'm like conscious of it. This is so exciting,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely was brain farting in regards to the fact that like clearly you were not a fetus and listening to Dookie, but just the idea of like that may have been your first entry as far as their music was concerned, but like clearly
I think, like Dookie was, I mean, I for sure had Dookie and that was like the first Green Day that I ever heard. I think just like my friends knew it and one of my good friends has an older brother that was sort of like our entryway into all this stuff, so he had like introduced us to like Dookie and Green Day and like all that stuff. But I definitely had like all their other albums like before Warning and then, but it's like I remember like not really understanding the concept of like even sort of like recording quality or like having a sense of like what came first or what came when, like it was all just one sort of blob to me, and then when Warning came out, I was sort of like, oh, okay, so like there's sort of, it helped me like get a sense of like when things are happening with a band,
Right. Oh, totally. Just like the actual process of like putting out a record and touring, like once you start to put those pieces together, it's such a weird, like you're like, wow, oh, so this is like planned. Like you guys are doing this on purpose.
It's like just the fact that you sort of like suddenly have this understanding of like, wow, so these guys have been doing this for like a while already. Like they didn't just like appear big, like that was always like kind of a fascinating thing to like start to understand as a kid, was like, oh, so they like worked their way up to this,
Yeah, absolutely. You start to the breadcrumbs are trickled through it, and then you start to follow along, and you can understand, like, especially musical progression over time, where it's like, oh, the band added this sound or whatever, and okay, I see where they're coming from. I know you spoke about it a little bit earlier in regards to moving down to Richmond, and that was like your first experience. I mean, clearly, like moving out and moving to a larger city to quote unquote make it from a musical perspective, where you
Not
can.
my quote.
I know. Yes, I will. I will use the big air quote there, but at least be present in a place where you could feel like you were a part of a scene. And I know you were at one point too. You were also entertaining just kind of wherever you felt like you could try to play in a band. Is that correct?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I that was like a funny thing coming out of high school, is like, you know, me and a few of my friends were in this band. We're sort of like, we know that we want to kind of like, I don't know, like take music seriously, like doing music stuff, you know, but like had no concept of like what that would mean or how to do that in any real way. You know, we just knew like, we want to be in a band, we want to go on tour, we want to, you know, do lots of music stuff. So we were sort of like, I guess let's move to a city that has, you know, like confirmed has a scene, you know?
Right.
And we had some friends and family who had moved to Richmond, and we knew stuff was happening down there. And, you know, even like, again, this like older brother, friend's older brother, that was like a big deal. Shout out to Dan. But he had already moved to Richmond, and, you know, he would come back and visit his family and everything. And, you know, sometimes he'd have like CDs of other local bands and stuff that he'd just found or that he'd played with or whatever. And, you know, there was something about like, wow, so he's like, we would hear these bands and they were cool and good. And there was something really kind of exciting about like, so the bands that are just like around town are good.
Right.
Like, wow, that's crazy, you know? And like, obviously we knew of like big bands from Richmond, like Avail or Strike Anywhere or whatever, you know, but like the idea that like even the small bands that are sort of like just figuring it out, like us, are like so cool and good and feel like they're doing real things, you know? And, you know, I look back on it now and it's like a lot of these were like just demos, you know, and like they were great, but like it was like they weren't like, you know, it was just like such a kind of what I was saying earlier of like it felt so wild that there could be so much cool stuff in a place because there was so little cool stuff where I was.
Right.
It like wasn't that much, you know, like there were bands and we would play like local shows and, you know, stuff at community centers, or like the skating rink was a place where they did a lot of shows and stuff like that. And, you know, it was really cool and really fun. And I'm really grateful that there was that kind of stuff there, especially because it was so small, you know. But just to like imagine a place where it was like, wow, like there's just a ton of bands here and a lot of them are really great and they're all like real and doing stuff, you know, like there was this like sort of intangible concept of like, what is a real band? You know?
Totally.
Which is funny because like now I would basically be like, I don't know anyone that's doing it, you know, like I don't think there is like an actual sort of like, you know, that barrier doesn't exist in my brain as much as an adult. But like as a kid, there was something about like, if we live here, like maybe we can be a real band, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you feel like you're to that point, you're connected to a scene. You can, especially too, when you start to see these bands that percolate and tour and get outside the city, where it's like, oh, Strike Anywhere. Like I see them at a local coffee shop and they just got back from tour, and you just start to really, really like it gels in your head in ways that, you know, it wouldn't before if you weren't there at that city.
And like, you know, like Strike Anywhere especially was big because like they played in DC and Baltimore all the time. So I saw them a ton when I was a kid. And just the idea of, yeah, like you're saying, like, whoa, I live in the same city as this band that I think is, you know, just so cool and like really seems like they're doing a lot of stuff. You know, there was something about that where you felt like, you know, proximity to things happening would be worthwhile. You know, I mean, I guess that's why anybody moves to a city, you know?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. For sure. And I know that like you would probably define Hold Tight and that sort of era of your musical life to be the first time you really, you know, toured, obviously put out records. Totally. Okay, got it. Yeah. And I it's funny too, because Hold Tight, like I was aware via Animal Style and like that it's such an interesting time, like the early 2010s of the whole sort of, you know, easy core, like pop punk, like you didn't really all those weirdo subgenres that existed. And it was so interesting to watch different bands approach it differently, where it was like, oh yeah, this is more of a set your goals thing versus like a fest thing, and like Hold Tight was more of a fest thing.
We that was always like a funny thing. It was like that, those like incredibly minor differences between like bands that would just like completely change what you were doing, and like our whole thing was like, we just wanted to be Lifetime,
Sure.
Like Lifetime's one of my favorite bands, and we were like really trying to do Lifetime, and you're totally right that like it was also like loving like Latterman and stuff like that,
Yep.
and but then also having grown up on like Green Day and obviously like Blink-182 and like all that type of stuff, but yeah, that was definitely like the first band that I'd ever like done anything sort of like really
professional,
really put out records, like was in a studio. Like that was my first time doing like any of that stuff. And it was definitely, that was like a really interesting time in just like the world of punk, I guess, at least in my mind, because like it felt like, I don't know, it just felt like bands could like really, like if you went and did like a month-long tour and played in a bunch of basements all across the country, like you were doing it, like that was already like, that was like,
right.
Like it was so, it just didn't seem to like the idea of anything like really going that far beyond that, like didn't really exist at that time, in a way that I think was pretty fun, like it was just very, I just remember being a kid and thinking like, oh, if you can like play in a basement and people seem into it every night, like I could do that forever, and as an adult, like, I don't know if I could hang with that, but, it was just like, it was like such a special time. And it felt like, it was just like a lot of bands, like, what you like the fest and everything, like it felt like just a lot of cool stuff happening around that kind of little world of bands.
Right. And it was, to your point too, it was that ability to exist even underneath like whatever bands were playing quote unquote real venues. And like you said, where it's just like playing DIY spaces across the country, and bands could come home and just be like, oh yeah, like I don't need to go back to the bagel shop for a month because like we have some cash in our pocket. And that's like unbelievable. Like no one ever would have thought that that was even possible 2 years ago. And now there's a little network that is writing parallel to all this other stuff that's happening.
For sure. And I think like, it's, I sort of like look back on that time with like half sort of like rosy glasses and then half sort of like, maybe we didn't have everything figured out. Like, especially like, I do think like even now, like I feel like bands are like a little more comfortable with like, no, we're like trying to do stuff, like we want to like, see our thing grow. And like back then, like you kind of couldn't really like that. It was still like close enough to the 90s and everything that wasn't what that like just wasn't how like music coming from the underground like was, like there wasn't really, people didn't like I remember like giving away like it like Bandcamp really starting, and that like it was like super important that we like gave away the record for free on Bandcamp, and like it was like like active like giving something away for free was like what was going to get people to get into it, and I sort of look back on that now and I'm like, and that was like just the general like vibe for everybody, and I kind of look back on it now and I'm like, oh man, like we really should have like valued what we were doing a little bit more.
Right. Well, yeah, just the idea, and that actually dovetails perfectly into a question I was going to ask, because you, like you were talking about earlier, like you took what you did very seriously, and the idea of, and I'm using a lot of air quotes in this discussion, but the business side of things, like even, with what you do with the PR side of things, having to understand the balance between, doing things because you want to versus doing things because like, oh, this will provide a little sustenance or whatever, like, get us to the next town, that sort of stuff. How have you treated the business side of things? Is it just like, I obviously have to do this to exist and this is kind of necessary evil, or do you enjoy certain aspects of it?
Do you mean in terms of like being in a band?
Yeah, being in a band, and then honestly like running your own business and like doing all the stuff that you do currently.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really like think about any of it all that much until I was like got into like working like behind the scenes in music. Like I didn't like any like band that I was in, like the like, like you said, the quote unquote business side of it was like heavy on the quotes, like there just wasn't really much to think about outside of like, do we have enough t-shirts to sell right now or whatever, or like I was saying, like crazy stuff like, this Bandcamp thing's popping and people seem to really like it when you just give it away. So let's do that.
Right.
Like, and that was like just the time. I mean, that was like the same time when, like Radiohead and Nine Inch Nails, like all kinds of bands were like, file sharing was really popping off. And like, it was just a weird music time, like all across the board. But yeah, right. It's like you didn't really like think about any of that stuff, like I was saying earlier, it didn't seem like there was anywhere to go other than like just playing with your buds, traveling around, like this is what it is, and not in a like not in a bad way, just in a sort of like, this is cool, this is what we're doing, and not really like thinking of it too hard beyond that, and it wasn't really until like way later when I like, fell into kind of doing like behind the scenes stuff where I like really learned anything about like the music business side of it, like I just didn't know anything until then.
I get to butt in and tell you about evilgreed.net. They are a web store solution for bands and record labels, but you as the consumer, you can win by going to these web stores and using this promo code 100 words. Trust me in saying, if you like anything heavy/artistic in regards to like punk, hardcore, and metal, Evil Greed has you covered in spades. Like, let me just list a few things that they have going on. The pre-orders. They have some new Portrayal of Guilt shirts, some Fucked Up shirts, Creeping Death, Incendiary has a new pre-order, Drain also has a pre-order going on. There is so much cool stuff. They got vinyl, they got merch. It's amazing. It ships from Berlin, Germany. And I know you probably hear that and you're like, oh man, I'm based in the United States. It's going to take forever to get me. No, that's not true. It ships very fast. And then on top of it, I've ordered from them. It got to me in like a week. And plus, the shipping rates are totally reasonable. It's not something where you're going to like, dude, I'm paying $40 to get a shirt to me over in the United States of America. Nope, not happening. Evilgreed.net. Please go to their website and use the promo code 100 words. It gets you 10% off of your entire order. Please have fun with evilgreed.net. I love what they do, and they got just great stuff. So buy merch to your heart's content, okay? Evilgreed.net, 100 words is the promo code.
Leftovers or the DMV
Number 97
or house cleaning or Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
I always use that idea that it's like, even if you're getting paid $100 to play the show, that still is a business transaction, and you still have to understand all the implications of what goes into it or whatever. But, some people, it's like, especially if you are the vocalist or lead guitarist or whatever, it seems like it always falls on those people's shoulders more than other people, unless there's like, a drummer that takes the reins of it. But then it's like, sometimes it doesn't fall on the person's plate that should be taking care of it because they maybe care about it more. It's just, I've always found it such an interesting dichotomy in regards to that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that especially like in Hold Tight, we like literally had a drummer that was always taking care of it.
Right.
Like Alex was like way better at all that stuff than I was, like he always kind of like had, because he like booked a lot of shows in Richmond and everything too. So like he just was like handled that whole side.
That's
of it.
perfect. Yeah.
I don't think there was really much to handle, but like, he, like I said, like from booking shows and stuff, like I think he knew how to like just figure all that stuff out. But it also was just so much of kind of what you were saying earlier that it was like, if you were lucky at the end of the night, somebody handed you some money for gas and then you went on your way. Like
Totally.
It wasn't like much to think about, and it wasn't until like kind of way later that any of that stuff kind of even like crossed my transom. But like, and I think now it seems like bands like get introduced to a lot of that stuff earlier, and it's probably good because like I just didn't know anything for so long,
Right.
And I think like I don't know. I don't know if I even think it's good or bad. I'm value neutral on it because I think you just come to that stuff when you come to it, and you have to kind of there's like a little bit of figure it out as you go along,
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I know, I agree. I mean, sometimes if you're introduced to certain ideas, quote unquote, too early, it might poison your brain where it's like, oh man, if we don't reach this milestone when we're a year at being a band, it's like, no, man, it's like that's not how it works. Just calm down, just have fun. So with, I know that the path that you went on in regards to, PR, like you were mentioning, wasn't something that you really had a vision for or even knew existed. So what was kind of, I guess, your path, so to speak? What you were just like, oh yeah, I'm just playing in bands, hanging out with friends. Like clearly you were just working, random jobs and stuff like that. But did you just basically want to root yourself in and around music, whatever that meant?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just naturally was already sort of, excuse me, like centering a lot of my life around music. And I was sort of like, like by the time I fell into doing like PR stuff, I was doing this band called Teen Death. And we ended up like getting signed to a label, and one of the people at the label did PR stuff and sort of like introduced me to that kind of world. And it all kind of just, snowballed from there. Like it was a very kind of organic, just right place, right time, fall into it kind of thing, because like you said, like I definitely never was, I barely had a concept of like what a publicist was or what any of that stuff really even
right.
With like, I remember finding out that, like we'd had a publicist for Hold Tight stuff like way after the fact. Like, and I was just like, I don't even know, like, I don't know what that does, like, I don't know what that is,
Sure.
And it was just, I just like really stumbled into it. And I don't know. I think it's just, it's sort of like I was saying, like really early on, like, I think I just always was very engaged by like things involving music, like it was just really the thing that even when I was a kid, it was like the thing that I would feel I could just like put my attention into and stay there, like with like other things I would try to do them. I would, like there was before I fell into being a publicist, I was a substitute teacher, and I had it like a minute where I was like, maybe I'll be a teacher. I guess like that seems like something to do. I don't, like it's like I couldn't,
right.
I don't know, like nothing else really ever was really like locking me in any way. You
were just you were collecting experiences and kind of throwing it out there, but you knew that music was always kind of pulling you back. It's like, well, if I can figure out a way to make money off of this, then that would be ideal.
Yeah. And it wasn't even like, because that was the thing is like, I had never even considered like, why don't you get a job doing something in music? Like I'd literally never thought of it.
Right.
I'd only ever been like, do band stuff. And to me, band stuff was like, not a thing that you do as a career, it was just like a thing that you do because you like it, so it was really just like a completely kind of like organic sort of like stumbling into it from just being in bands and meeting people, and before you know it, you've been a publicist for however long I've been a publicist, I can't even remember.
As you were kind of exploring this and doing all of these things that you're talking about, I'm guessing your parents were they ever concerned, like, what the hell is James doing, like touring the country, like, or were they generally permissive enough for you to obviously do it because you did, but were they concerned?
Yeah, I mean, they weren't ever like they weren't ever concerned, but I think that they were definitely like weary.
Sure.
But like they knew that I think they could see that it was like really important to me and that it made me happy, and that was like where, that was like good enough. But I definitely, like they would always kind of be like, do you think you're ever going to go back to school? Do you think you're ever going to try college? Like that kind of thing. And I never was like, no, it just didn't really happen.
Right.
You know, like I had sort of dipped a toe into a few community college courses, like right when I stumbled into kind of working behind the scenes in music. And, you know, that was like, I was really relieved that I had like found something else, because I had started going to school, like, you know, taking a couple community college classes and like wasn't really enjoying it, you know? And I was a little bit like, boy, this is going to be a tough slog if this is the way to become an art teacher or whatever I'm trying to do right now, you know?
Sure. Right. You're like, I don't know if I'm cut out for this.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like, and not in it, just, there was like things I liked about it, but like for the most part, it's just like, I don't know. It felt really daunting, you know, to be like well into your like 20s and had never gone to like any college at all, and sort of I felt very like out of school, you know, like that mindset of like being a student, you know, and trying to like get back into that. And so, I mean, I was really relieved when I fell into being a publicist. And I think like my parents, when that kind of stuff started to happen, I think they were definitely like, you know, cool. Like he figured it all out, you know, like he all that stuff that he was so into, like, you know, really paid off, and he like found his way. And I think also even when you're like, you know, when you're like at a family gathering or whatever, and like your cousin is asking you like what you're doing, it's like, I think they were like psyched that I had an answer that was like, here's a word that sounds like a real job.
Right. Yeah. Here's a practical application to this really nebulous idea he's been pursuing. Yeah, it's like, exactly. Hey, what's James up to? Music. What does that mean? Exactly. Don't worry about it. Yeah. I'd like to talk about the gentle art of PR, because I've always, just as long as I've existed in, you know, independent music, playing in bands and working at labels and stuff, I've always not only admired but really appreciated the work that, you know, that profession does, because I think it is so difficult to not only get people to either care about music that they don't care about, and then also, and this is where the question lies, like, how do you not be a punisher as a PR person? Because like that's hard, not to just be like, hey, can you please cover this band? It's like 17 emails later, ignored emails later, you're like, hey, can you do this? And they're like, actually, yeah, good idea. And it's like, right. What caused you to all of a sudden respond to me? So that'll happen. Yeah, I can imagine. So yeah, I mean, I realize it's maybe a pretty complicated question, but like how, I guess, how do you approach the PR side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of it, I guess, as far as like not being a punisher, like, yeah, I agree. Like that's the job. Like the job is to like follow up a lot, you know. But you just get used to like. You get used to rejection, you get used to being ignored, you know, but you also get used to sort of like, you know, just talking to people. I always found that like you just kind of have to talk to people like they're people, and not like you can't be too like clinical about it. You can't be too like uptight about it. You just kind of have to like level with people a little bit.
Right.
You know? And I don't know. I think like, you know, you can usually like, to me, a lot of it is just like trying to have a sense of like, do your best to see who likes what, and really only bug them about stuff you think they're actually going to like, you know, like that maybe sounds a little sort of like simple or cliche about it, I guess. But like, you know, it is just, you're trying to get a sense of what people enjoy and bug them about stuff you think they'll like, and hopefully they do, you know. Like it's like funny because it's a really nebulous job, but the core of it is very like, I show you some music and I hope you like it, you know, and you just kind of have to, I don't know. I think it's a lot of it is like from being in bands and stuff, and falling into it from being in bands. I think I just always like really tried to keep in mind that, you know, what was the most important thing to me was like the starting point of like really understanding like where the band was coming from and how they wanted their thing presented, because I think I just, yeah, like could relate to the idea of like someone else is out there like, showing people your band and you're not speaking for it yourself. So like that can be scary, and you just want to do it in the most sort of like accurate and like faithful to the band way as possible, and like I think if you can start from that place, it like goes okay, like that's like
sure,
it's like a good place to be. And then all the rest of it, like the hammering on doors and all that stuff kind of like, it falls into place.
Yeah, sure. The golden rule of putting yourself in someone else's shoes is very much applicable to the work that you do with that.
Yeah, and it's I guess it's just like never you can't ever let it be like lost on you that it it's like this is something that somebody like worked really hard on, and you have to like kind of try to take that seriously when you're showing it to other people.
Yeah, absolutely, makes sense. With the music that you're creating with Dazy, I know you are incredibly prolific with that because obviously it is your brainchild and you get to create most of it yourself or just, work with some trusted people. I'm sure as you were putting it together, and there hasn't, clearly been a fear for you to play music and play in bands and stuff like this, but because this is just so solely focused on you, was there a trepidation as you started to kind of just like put it out there? I know it's not like your namesake where it's like, oh, here's James Goodson that's out there, but was there any sort of internal dialogue that you had of like, oh, well, hopefully people like this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I hadn't like put out any music for a while, like I'd just been doing other stuff. Like I was busy with work, and I was touring with like other artists and stuff like that. And I had just sort of like fallen off of like putting out my own stuff, but I was like still making it, like that was the weird thing, was like it was this, my wilderness years or whatever. Like I hadn't stopped writing songs. So it's like I had all these songs on the computer, and I'm like, I really like these songs, but like I don't know what the hell to do with them. And I was really like hung up on it for a while. And so then when I finally did start kind of just floating stuff out there, I don't know, it was I was really nervous about it, but not in any really like I didn't like have any like tangible reason to be nervous. I just like, I think it was just one of those things where like you've stopped like riding the bike and suddenly you're a little nervous when you're to ride a bike again. Mm-hmm. It like seems scary, like putting yourself out there again, like, cause it's always scary to put out music, it's always scary to put out anything that you like worked hard on and like put yourself into,
Sure.
And I just really fallen out of like practice of like what it was like to do that, and yeah, once I started like doing it again and like just putting things like, it's funny because it does go back to like kind of what I was talking about before about when I was, like 19, and it was about like just putting a thing on Bandcamp for free and whatever, like just see what happens, like I just went back to that,
right.
And I don't know, it was really sort of like freeing and just felt it was like once I started like putting stuff out again, I like remembered why it's fun to like put things out, because you're just like, oh cool, like great, I like made songs at my house. Like I was able to, because I was like making it all at my house too, it sort of like made the whole thing feel more like spontaneous for me, because I could just sort of like write songs, record them, I'd send them off to get like mixed and mastered by my buddy Justin, and then he'd send it back and I would make some cover art for it and could put it up on the internet within like, like this whole process could be like a week long if I wanted to.
Right. Yeah. True. Because the idea that process has such a short feedback loop for you, it's like, oh, if you don't like this, maybe you'll like something I'll put out next week. So it's okay.
Yeah, it really took the stakes out of it in a way that like I needed, like I had built up these like ridiculous non-existent stakes in my head, and the spontaneity and the ability to like make it quickly and to, because I was so used to like, you work on a bunch of songs for a long time and you have to, you've got your bandmates and everybody's like put so much into this and everything feels very important. You guys like spent a bunch of money to go to the studio. You're, whatever. Like there's always like all these plans, like, it's a lot of stuff, and there was something about fully getting rid of all of that and just making it into like, I just made a thing in my house and then I like put it out there, that was just so, I don't know. It was like really different than what I'd been used to, and fun and freeing. And also like, a lot of like when I finally started like putting stuff out was also like peak, 2020, like super intense pandemic time. So like there was no shows or anything like that, so the idea of even like having a live band or like doing anything live or that whole element of it didn't exist. So even with like recording, it was like, who knows if this will ever be played live. So I'll just record it however, and not think like if I want to put like 10 guitars on it, like who cares whether you can achieve that live or not,
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's just like, yeah, I will reverse engineer it if we need to ever play, but it's fine. Just put it out there.
Yeah. And we figured it out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and plus too, it's like I always, and I'm sure you appreciate this as well. It's like when you find like-minded people that are doing something either similar or, have the same sort of mindset, and you feel like you're kind of part of this general collective. It's not like a, movement or a subgenre or whatever, but it's like, obviously what Ian's doing, like all of that sort of stuff. Cause it's like, oh yeah, we feel like I got our little corner where it's like, we're going to just like bombard you with music, like we'll be happy to do that. And then and it makes it feel less alone, I'm sure.
Yeah. And like Ian's like a really special guy for me because like he was like one of my first friends to sort of like find it and be like, I really like this, and kind of like push me on it and like he was really encouraging about like, this is cool and you should, you should take it seriously. And which is funny because like I was just talking earlier about how I would like have a hard time with not taking things seriously. And when I first started doing the Dazy stuff, it's like, my whole thing was to take like the craft of it as seriously as possible, like the recording everything myself and like the cover art, and like I had my like hand on everything, like I was like, I want to be the person who like does every sort of part of this being made, but then when it came to everything else, like putting it out into the world, I was sort of like actively not taking it seriously, like I just didn't, maybe because like my work involved like, putting like helping people put music out and all that stuff, like I think I was just sort of like kind of hands off with it. And Ian was very like, this is cool and you should like, he was just like, you should try to play shows, you should try to do stuff, you should, he was like a big like champion of it,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you need people like that in your life to, whether they are creatively doing it or whether they're just like advocates for you. It's like, oh no, like there's something here. You should do it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's like, that was like a real, I think that was the thing too, is like, I hadn't like, the process of like making these songs and stuff for so long was such a small circle. It would literally just be me. I would probably show stuff to my wife, and then I would show stuff to Justin when he's mixing it, and that was it.
Yeah. Right.
Like very few people like, penetrated that like incredibly small sort of like, focus group or whatever. And I think like having somebody like Ian, who's like a good friend and somebody whose music I just love, like it and be a real, cheerleader for it was just really, it was really validating.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I wanted to hit on was the idea, like you mentioned your wife, and I mean, clearly you've been doing the PR stuff as you are exploring all of these other, creative avenues from a music perspective. And, the idea that you're getting out and touring and the band is becoming a larger part of your life in ways that you maybe didn't originally anticipate. How are you, I guess, are you mindful of trying to kind of keep that balance of, home, life, work? Like, I know no one has the answer to that because that's a constant moving target, but is that something that you are either thinking about or actively engaged with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always like anybody that's like in bands that tour, like that's always like a huge part of it is just like, how do you keep that whole thing healthy, and I think like, it's a little easier, when you're a little older and like have more just like a sense of what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with, and like knowing that kind of line for yourself is probably like where having a healthy relationship with that stuff starts, you know?
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know. It's definitely, it's been funny. Like, cause I definitely, you know, I was pretty like taken aback by anybody hearing these songs, to be honest, you know? Like it was really just a thing that I was kind of goofing around with. And the way that it's grown has just been really shocking and awesome and really mind blowing. You know, but so I definitely, but you know, all that is to say that like when you know, when I finally got to like put a bunch of those songs on a tape and Convulse put it out, that was kind of like I my whole thing up to that point had been like, oh, I sure hope I make a tape, you know?
Right. It's like, wow, anything above that is like, wow, this is weird. I didn't expect this.
Yeah, like it's all gone like so above and beyond anything that I could have like expected, you know, that I don't know. I think that really sort of guides and colors the way that I look at all of it, is like it's all amazing, you know, like it's all awesome, you know?
Right. Like if I run into problems, these are good problems to have, because I couldn't expect that, you know. I'm sure just the idea of like, oh, doing a, you know, US tour with snail mail, I guess we're doing that. Sure. Here we go.
Yeah. It's wild. You know, like that's like stuff that I never would have like imagined doing, you know? So it's like, I don't know. I just have a real like take it as it comes kind of attitude about it, and I don't know. So far, that's like gone well. So I'm inclined to keep approaching it that way, I think.
Sure, absolutely. Well, James, thank you for doing the podcast treatment, as it were, because I know you're not appearing on any other podcasts on this quote unquote press run. So I appreciate that. Joking aside, I genuinely do. I've always admired your work and was very glad that we could do this.
Hell yeah, man. Thank you so much. I had a super good time.
Oh boy, thank you very much, James, for coming on the show. I was going to thank his PR person, but I just reached out to him, so it's great because he does PR. It's funny. Anyways, you need to check out Dazy if you already haven't. They are hitting the road. They're currently touring right now with Snail Mail, and he's just out there, man, putting out music, touring when he can. It's so cool. So check out Dazy because I love what they do. Next week, I have a great chat with a person named Madison Woodward. He plays in a band called Object of Affection. He also works at the really, really awesome venue/event space called Brain Dead Studios. They also got a clothing company. He's involved with a lot. And then on top of it, he also is a partner at Sound and Fury, which is a music festival that I put on for a couple years and obviously has existed for many, many years. If you pay attention to punk and hardcore, it's one of my favorite festivals just ever. Like I loved doing it, even though it was one of the most stressful times of my life. But it was really cool to connect with Madison. I've met him on a couple occasions, and it was nice to be able to get to know him on a deeper level. So next week, Madison Woodward is on. Until then, please be safe, everybody.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
The biggest black market you've never heard of might be blooming right under your nose.
This plant could sell for between $10,000 and $15,000 on the open market.
And where there's big money, there are bigger risks.
We were just tied up in these big M16s stuck to our heads.
I'm Summer Rain Oaks. I'm a plant expert and author. On the Bad Seeds podcast, we explore why your favorite houseplants might have a criminal record. Listen to Bad Seeds on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, it's Angela Yee. Have you had a chance to check out my podcast, Lip Service? With artists like Cardi B, Young Blue, Moneybagg Yo, Lil Durk, Yo Gotti, and some of the hottest artists today talk about personal details about their love life, relationships, and things you won't hear anywhere else. My favorite part about Lip Service is seeing a different side of people. Make sure you check out my podcast, Lip Service, on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.